Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Do I Have Time for This? The series that looks at old and new video games, both indie and AAA, to help you figure out whether or not you have the time to actually play it, finish it, 100% complete it, or just leave it in your backlog to forever gather dust. We're all busy in life. Jobs, kids, classes, exercising, you name it. So let's take a little time right now to look at Blasphemous and figure out, do I have time for this? Today we're going to take a look at the pixel art Souls-like Metroidvania Blasphemous, developed by the Game Kitchen and published by Team 17. Looking at this in 2023, there have been 3 DLC releases: The Stir of Dawn, Strife and Ruin, and Wounds of Eventide. They all add additional areas, NPCs, bosses, and Strife and Ruin even contains a boss rush mode, all at no extra cost. Blasphemous is a brutal and unforgiving game, set in the brutal and unforgiving world of Custodia, a land ravaged by the actions of their holy figure Escobar and plagued with horrific monsters. The religious themes of this game aren't just hinted at, they're outright stated. The god of this game manifests itself in the form of the Miracle, an otherworldly power that has the ability to bless or curse all those who call upon it, although what we would consider a blessing and the people of Custodia would consider a blessing are wildly different. Following the first miracle, where a young boy was twisted into a tree and worshipped as an icon, His Holiness Escobar turns his back on his faith, believing he had been forsaken by the god. As a result, he was also turned into a tree, but burnt to ash, and anyone who attempted to climb this pile of ash to claim Escobar's throne was turned into a monster. Okay, bear with me. It is as weird as it sounds, but it's good. You are the penitent one, the last of your sacred order, tasked to seek out the cradle of affliction, this big pile of ash, and attempt to climb it. Whilst the big pointy hat they wear may look silly, it's actually based on real-life imagery and practices people still carry out today. It's this pseudo-realism that adds to the depth of lore you can find in Blasphemous. There is a massive amount of lore and story to get into here, as you can likely tell by how wild it sounds. This story is often hidden away within NPC dialogue and item descriptions, so you can really seek out as much or as little of this narrative as you want. If you want a lore deep dive, I suggest a video by Gingy. There'll be a link below in the description. His breakdown of the lore is definitely worth a shout. Ultimately, Blasphemous shows us a world where faith truly is blind, and you may want to think twice before kneeling to pray. Now, if you're like me and play a lot of indie games, the minute you hear pixel art Souls-like Metroidvania, you will roll your eyes and you'll groan. But trust me, this is one of the best games you can find out there, depending on how much time you're willing to sink into it. Armed with your mythical blade, the Mea Culpa, you are set to absolve the guilt of the world of Custodia and bring it back in line with the Miracle. I'm not going to lie, especially at the start, this game is hard, like really hard. Getting to grips with the parry and movement mechanics, alongside the often required duality of platforming and combat at the same time, can be punishing in a way that almost feels unfair. Some would say it was cheap difficulty, but some might also say it's thematically on point. It depends how generous you're being to the Game Kitchen on any given day. Combat here is very weighty and feels impactful. Once you have the sword upgraded to include a few additional combos, there's naturally a parry, as with the majority of these types of games, and a unique finisher move for each enemy in the game, which are horrifically gory and sometimes downright not safe for work. Very satisfying though. There are also prayers to find and unlock, which act as spells capable of inflicting massive damage, if you can build enough fervor by attacking enemies, that is. Whilst I did feel as though combat was satisfying here, the game was sorely lacking weapon variety. Oftentimes games like these only offer you one weapon and some spells, but I always feel like more choice allows more freedom to express yourself, and really make the silent protagonist yours. I am happy to say this seems to have been fixed in the upcoming sequel, however. Platforming is the true mixed bag in the holy gumbo that is Blasphemous. The issue I have with it is that you are very easily sent cascading to the floor by certain attacks from enemies that are sat just out of sight off screen, so when you near the end of a spike pit you have seconds to react before being sent to your death. This, coupled with a ledge grab mechanic that only applies to certain ledges, really can make this a war of attrition with the area layout itself, especially when trying to fend off enemies at the same time. One of the DLCs also added in timed platforming sections which really push the limits of what you're able to do in the game, and were far more frustrating than rewarding. You can essentially create a character build in-game by using prayer beads and sword hearts. interchangeable items you acquire in the world through exploration, challenges, and quests. Prayer beads are slotted onto your rosary, an upgradable chain which starts out with 2 slots and eventually expands to 8, which allows a massive variation in the types of resistances and skills you have. The large majority of prayer beads are simply buff items, but the real trade-offs come with the Mea Culpa hearts. You can only equip 1 Mea Culpa heart at a time, and they require you to be at a pre-due or checkpoint to swap out. These compromises come in many forms. Do you want more attack at the cost of health? Increase spell damage at the cost of blood attacks? Recover health after killing enemies but your healing items recover less? There are 11 different hearts and 35 prayer beads to find, with some extras in the DLC, offering a huge range of variety for you to tailor your playstyle on the fly. There are 51 different types of enemies to purge of sin in the original version of Custodia, with many more being added in the DLC. I definitely appreciated the variety here. There were so few reskins of previous enemies, each area felt brand new and organic to the world. Every enemy type told a story just by looking at them, their twisted and broken forms showing their ugly inner nature prior to transformation. Whilst you can definitely point at some enemies and just say, "I hate you!" the large majority just feel well balanced, fair, and grotesque. As I said before, each creature design really informs you on the world and story in Blasphemous, none more so than the bosses. Blasphemous holds absolutely nothing back in these boss fights. The design of each boss getting more bizarre and refined as time goes on, with an intricate backstory for each boss if you're willing to seek it out. The way the bosses attack is relentless, and provides the basis for my Souls-like comparison. You oftentimes are spending the large majority of the fight dodging well-telegraphed attacks, and looking out for the perfect opportunity to smite these disbelievers. I will point out that some of the bosses can pin you into a corner, or have attacks that seem a little unfair or not very well telegraphed, but for the most part when that orchestral music kicks in, and you see this huge monstrosity that you need to fight, you'll barely notice it unless you die a few times. With this being an almost Souls-like, there actually is a story reason for a punishment for death. When you die, you drop a fragment of guilt. Instead of this being your XP, this fragment actually reduces your XP gain and your fervor or magic meter. This means whilst not all is lost every time you die, you do lose a significant portion of your offensive capabilities, which you can either recover or pay a fee at various points around the map to get back to full strength. Exploration is significantly rewarding in Blasphemous. Really reading into character dialogue, speaking with the dead, and reading item descriptions will offer you various hints and tips on what to do in this sprawling world. Unlocking the various Metroidvania ability upgrades, whilst not essential for the completion of the game, do offer tangible gameplay rewards in the form of completing NPC questlines, revealing hidden shortcuts, prayer beads, and collectible bones which you can trade for XP. On release, the world of Custodia was massive, but with extra DLC content added for free post-launch, the game has truly come into its own as one of the most expansive Metroidvania maps out there. Color coding sections so you can tell the difference between the areas was a nice touch, with the map being as minimal in terms of presentation as it is. I do feel like we could have done with a bit extra in terms of listing completion for each area on the map, so say a percentage indicator to say whether you are missing a collectible or upgrade in the area, but I feel like that's an overarching issue I have with Blasphemous as a whole, that I'll get onto later. Much like the enemies and bosses in this game, the NPCs have their own backstory and expansive questlines. These questlines in some cases can span the entire map, requiring you to meet up with them in certain locations and provide assistance or collect items to bring back to them in Alboro, the main hub and the only inhabited settlement in the world of Custodia. These questlines are extremely tricky to figure out at times, but are rewarding in the same way exploration is, with gameplay affecting items and prayers for you to use in your pilgrimage to the Cradle of Affliction. Pixel graphics are most definitely not anything new or groundbreaking in the indie space, nor the Metroidvania space for that matter. That being said, Blasphemous manages to pull off one of the most intriguing art styles I've ever seen in the game. The Gothic Spanish architecture mixed with the visceral, disgusting monster designs really paints the picture of a pious place that has slowly crumbled into disrepair. Spikes litter the floors, once proud structures crumble all around the world. Whilst everything is falling apart, you can often see near pristine interiors of the upper church areas, evoking pictures of humble towns with a monument to religious decadence in the centre. The Game Kitchen cited the painting A Procession of Flagellants by Francisco de Goya as the biggest influence on the game's art style, among other paintings of the time, and you can really see it. I think overall the pixel art actually works in the game's favour, allowing them to depict some brutal violence and the odd bit of nudity without it distracting from the overall tones of punishment and guilt. It also adds a level of surrealism that makes it almost nightmare-like, just off from the picturesque and pristine visuals you'd expect from something religious. So yeah, something I've tried to edit around to the best of my ability so far in this video is the extreme gore and nudity in this game. By now you should have gotten the message, but if not, this game is brutal and violent in every sense of the word. Whilst this doesn't necessarily deal with realistic depictions of violence or mental health issues, it does deal with body horror and intense gore, so I would steer clear if this type of thing is typically against your sensibilities. As I said before, in terms of the character and enemy designs, every person, spirit, or monster you face in Blasphemous just drips in lore, and that's before they even speak. Whether it be a woman who is in a state of perpetual torture, or a huge demon intent of ripping your head from its shoulders, everything feels lovingly crafted, like time was really spent ensuring the visuals portrayed a story that oftentimes the actual cutscenes aren't willing to offer up. The macabre nature of the items you find really illustrate the state of the twisted and decaying world set in front of you. Whilst in most games getting a uvula is a bad thing, here in Blasphemous, it's a positive. The last thing worth mentioning here is the phenomenal soundtrack from Carlos Viola. The music when moving from place to place is filled with guitar strings, fitting in with the Spanish influences and is some really chilled out listening. Where this soundtrack truly shines is when entering grand areas or when fighting bosses, where the orchestral score booms, adding to the sense of scale these intimidating bosses offer. So, let's get down to it. How long does this game take? If you're looking to just do the main story, a few achievements, and having a few setbacks, you'll be looking at around 13.5 hours. If you decide you're going to get all of the achievements and collectibles, you can easily push this to around 30 hours, depending on whether or not you followed a guide. The free DLC they added totals up to an extra 10 or so hours of content, depending on whether you manage to actually find it. This brings me on to the biggest issue I have when it comes to recommending Blasphemous to you. Blasphemous is a hard game, but this isn't what gets in the way of the accessibility of it. Many people have come across hard games in the past, and it's either not been for them, or they've persevered and overcome what's laid in front of them. No, the main issue with Blasphemous lies in its completion. The quests are some of the most obscure things you will ever come across in a game. Some of these are hinted at, but the large majority are a case of figure it out or get a guide. The best part about playing a new game like this is that you can just discover new things and enjoy them at your own pace, but Blasphemous constantly gets in its own way with these ridiculously easy to miss achievements and items. Don't get me wrong, casually playing this game you may not notice these items are even missing, as some are just the standard upgrades or XP, but some of the Metroidvania upgrades are obscurely hidden behind collectibles or quests. The huge overutilization of hidden walls and floors, yes, somehow you're supposed to realize some floors are fake, is just stupid. You do get an equipable item to help point out secrets, but this results in you constantly running around, hoping for a ping that there's a secret nearby, and it doesn't feel organic at all to use. Next, the endings. There are 3 endings to this game. Now with your standard Metroidvania, you expect 1 or 2, maybe a 3rd hidden one, no worries. The issue is how you find the hidden endings. The first one is from equipping an item, dying multiple times with it, which lets you do challenges hidden in the world, eventually resulting in an item given to you at the start of the game, unlocking its true potential, with the only hint of this being provided in the first 10 minutes of the game. Just let that sink in for a second, and think how much time you'd have to sink into that without actually knowing anything about having to do it. The Wounds of Eventide DLC added a 3rd ending, which essentially demands you start a new game plus, then play the game in a specific way, finding a secret hidden area before fighting a certain boss, in order to bypass fighting them and turning them into an ally. Even with searching on the internet, you'll find the old Blasphemous wikis don't even have any information on this. It's just a case of looking on YouTube, as the old guides tend to leave it off. Whilst I do really enjoy Blasphemous, I couldn't see myself playing through the game 3 times in total, casual, completion, then New Game Plus, just to see all these endings and get all the achievements. Given there's no organic way to figure most of this out, it just seems like a waste of time unless you're a completionist or really like the world. Blasphemous goes for around £20 on Steam, but is regularly on sale, and whilst I always say price per hour isn't a good metric to go off, if you factor in the additional DLC, you really do get a good 20 to 30 hours on your average playthrough without going for completion. Again, like I always point out where possible, there is actually a free demo available on Steam if you want to try out the combat, look at a few more of the grisly visuals, and get a better feel of what this brutal world has to offer. A large majority of the early game is tough, but you will find it rewarding in the end if you persevere. Ultimately, I can definitely recommend a casual playthrough of Blasphemous. What I would say is if you're looking for a game with challenging combat, immersive lore and world building alongside rewarding exploration, this game is for you. However, if this is the only game you're getting for a while, whether or not you can put up with the amount of effort and guide following you're required to get to 100% completion is entirely up to you, with some of the additional DLC content being somewhat locked off behind New Game Plus and all of the really obscure quests. It's definitely hard to say this game respects your time overall if you're going for completion. Yes, you can have a blast playing through, but with the checkpointing being very sparse in some areas and the ability to easily traverse the world somewhat gated behind obscure to find Metroidvania upgrades, you really need significant portions of time to sit and play this game. Blasphemous is not well suited to someone with half an hour or so to spare, so please bear that in mind if you're someone with little free time or have something you have to keep leaving the game to attend to. This game is really designed to be played for extended sessions and really drinking in the world. It's a genuine shame that such a great, immersive game is just a little too immersive for its own good. Die-hard fans will no doubt be screaming here that it's fine for a game to be as inaccessible as this is, but in 2023, I don't think it hurts to be a little more helpful to the player. Hopefully some of the willfully obscure quests and secret elements are made a little more accessible in the sequel due out in the summer of this year. Seems as the other combat variety issues I mentioned are already confirmed to have been addressed, but in respect of that, we'll have to just see. So, do you think you have time for Blasphemous? On this channel I like to give my thoughts on the game, alongside a bit more of a deep dive on the time you have to invest, so you know what you're getting into before you load it up, because time is precious, right? If you enjoyed the video or found it useful, feel free to like and share. If you subscribe, I'm looking to put out regular content like this alongside some more in-depth video essays, so stick around, and if you have any requests on future videos, just drop them in the comments. And finally, if you want to come hang out and chat with me, you can find me over on twitch.tv/GraciousRhino every Sunday. I'm Gracious Rhino, look after each other, and I'll catch you soon.